Chosen one. The moment your eyes scanned the words declaring that you passed, something unexpected tightened inside your chest. It was not celebration. It was not relief. It was not the rush of triumph you imagined would flood your spirit after surviving everything you have endured. Instead, there was a quiet, almost unsettling exhaustion. A heaviness that did not match the announcement of victory. You did not smile. You did not feel fireworks in your soul. You felt tired, deeply tired. And perhaps you judged yourself for that reaction, wondering why your heart did not leap when heaven seemed to applaud. But that response tells a story. It reveals how long you have been in battle mode. Because for you, promotion has never meant rest. Every time you leveled up spiritually, the warfare intensified. Every time you broke through one barrier, another resistance rose to meet you. So now, even when victory is declared, your system braces for impact. You instinctively prepare for another blow, another test, another unexpected loss. Success has not felt safe in your past seasons. Breakthrough has often been followed by backlash. And so your body, trained by prolonged adversity, does not yet trust good news. The truth is, your wilderness season has officially expired. The rules that governed your isolation, your stretching, your hidden preparation, have run their course. The test has concluded. The assignment has been graded. You passed. But while the spiritual calendar has shifted, your nervous system has not yet caught up. Your body is still operating as if arrows are flying. Your mind is still scanning for threats. Your heart is still conserving energy in case survival is required again tomorrow. This is not a lack of faith. It is the residue of endurance. When someone has lived in fight or flight for an extended period of time, the absence of chaos can feel suspicious. Calm can feel temporary. Blessing can feel fragile. You have been surviving for so long that thriving feels unfamiliar. And unfamiliar territory can feel dangerous, even when it is good. That is why this message is not shallow encouragement. It is not a motivational pat on the back. It is not here to simply tell you to cheer up and move forward. This is a blueprint, a recalibration, a detailed unveiling of what actually happened in the spirit and what must now happen in your mind and body. Because passing the hardest test of your life is one thing. Learning how to live after the test is another. Many people fail in the transition, not because they lacked faith, but because they did not understand how to shift out of survival mode. You are not being congratulated just to feel inspired. You are being prepared to step into a completely different frequency of living. Here is the central tension you must confront honestly. You passed God's hardest test, yet you do not feel like a winner. You expected confetti. Instead, you feel caution. You expected strength. Instead, you feel depleted. You expected certainty. Instead, you feel a strange vulnerability. And that gap between spiritual reality and emotional experience is exactly where this new season begins. Victory has been declared in heaven, but your system still remembers the wilderness. The invisible weight you feel is not proof that you failed. It is evidence of how long you stood your ground. It is the imprint of battles survived. And now, before you can fully embrace what comes next, you must understand why your body is reacting this way and how to safely transition from warrior to ruler. Because the season of surviving has ended. The season of carrying begins. Now, to understand what is happening inside you, you must see that spiritual promotion has always carried a paradox. And Scripture quietly reveals this pattern through the life of Elijah in 1 Kings 19. Elijah had just stood on Mount Carmel and called fire down from heaven. He confronted 450 false prophets and watched God answer with undeniable authority. The drought ended. The people fell on their faces. It was one of the most dramatic public victories recorded in biblical history. If anyone had earned rest, it was Elijah. If anyone deserved a peaceful celebration, it was him. Yet the very next chapter does not show him hosting a feast. It shows him running for his life. It shows him collapsing under a broom tree, whispering that he has had enough. He asked God to let him die. That contrast is not random. It is revelation. The man who commanded fire from heaven could not command peace in his own nervous system. The prophet who carried public authority carried private exhaustion. And if you look honestly at your own life, you will recognize that same pattern. You have stood strong in public while quietly unraveling in private. You have prayed boldly while battling silent panic. You have declared faith while feeling fatigue that no one else could see. From the outside, people may have called you resilient, disciplined, spiritually mature. They saw the composure. They saw the integrity. They saw the unwavering stance when doors closed and critics whispered. But what they did not see was the cost. They did not see the nights your mind would not turn off. They did not see how many times you replayed conversations, losses, betrayals, and missed opportunities in your head. Public spiritual authority often hides private emotional depletion. And just like Elijah, you may have thought that victory would automatically erase the toll of the battle. Yet triumph does not instantly reset the nervous system. What you are experiencing has a name that is rarely discussed in spiritual circles. It is the residue of prolonged warfare. The nervous system can remain in trauma even after triumph. When someone has lived in constant vigilance, constantly bracing for impact, constantly adapting to crisis, their body becomes wired for survival. Hormones of stress become familiar companions. Hyper-awareness becomes second nature. You learn to anticipate disappointment before it arrived. You learned to lower expectations so you would not be crushed again. You learned to stay ready. And readiness kept you alive in the wilderness. It sharpened your discernment. It protected your integrity. It sustained your faith when nothing around you confirmed it. But survival mode is not meant to be permanent. It is designed for seasons of danger, not seasons of inheritance. The problem is that your body does not automatically know when the danger has passed. It continues scanning. It continues bracing. It continues holding tension long after the arrows have stopped flying. This is why, even now, you feel strangely hidden. You feel drained in a moment that should feel triumphant. You feel unable to celebrate fully. When someone congratulates you, or when a small breakthrough appears, something inside you hesitates. You do not want to lean into joy too quickly. You do not want to trust the calm. There is a quiet voice reminding you how quickly things have shifted in the past. And so instead of dancing, you watch. Instead of relaxing, you analyze. Instead of resting, you prepare. That does not make you ungrateful. It makes you conditioned by experience. Elijah's collapse was not a failure of faith. It was the human body processing the aftermath of intensity. And your inability to immediately rejoice is not weakness. It is evidence of how long you carried the weight without dropping it. What must be introduced here, gently but clearly, is the idea that your internal frequency is still tuned to the battlefield. Think of a soldier who has returned home but still reacts to loud noises as if they are explosions. The environment has changed, but the internal setting has not. Your spirit has crossed into a new season, yet your nervous system is still calibrated to conflict. This is what it means to be stuck in battlefield mode. You may no longer be under attack, yet you feel as though you are. You may no longer be in the cave, yet part of you still sleeps with one eye open. Your thoughts move quickly. Your body holds subtle tension. Your breathing is shallower than it should be. Your mind is alert, even in safe rooms. The battlefield frequency once served a purpose. It kept you disciplined. It kept you sober. It kept you from compromising under pressure. But now, it threatens to rob you of the very peace you fought to secure. Promotion requires a different internal posture than survival. Authority requires stability. Inheritance requires receptivity. If Elijah had stayed under that broom tree, believing his exhaustion was permanent, he would have missed the next phase of his assignment. But God did not rebuke him for collapsing. God fed him. God let him rest. God gently recalibrated him before sending him forward. And that is what is happening to you now. You are not being judged for your depletion. You are being prepared to transition. The invisible weight you feel is simply the final echo of a season that has already ended. And as you begin to recognize that your frequency is still tuned to battle, you also gain the power to retune it for peace, strength, and the authority that comes after surviving what should have broken you. When you step back and examine your life through the lens of Scripture, you begin to notice that what you have endured is not random chaos, but part of a consistent pattern woven through the bloodlines of those entrusted with weighty assignments. And this pattern reveals what can only be described as a wilderness equation. Job did not lose everything because he was weak. He lost everything because his integrity could withstand exposure. David was not anointed king and immediately crowned. He was anointed and then chased, hunted, and hidden in caves. Joseph was not given prophetic dreams so he could enjoy early applause. He was given dreams that led him into betrayal, slavery, false accusation, and prison. The pattern is undeniable. Before elevation, there is isolation. Before influence, there is invisibility. Before authority, there is abandonment. And if you are honest, your own story echoes this rhythm. You were shown glimpses of calling, glimpses of potential, glimpses of destiny. Yet the road that followed felt like contradiction. Doors shut without explanation. People misunderstood you. Opportunities evaporated at the edge of breakthrough. You were left alone in places that felt unfair. But what you experienced was not disqualification. It was alignment with a spiritual formula that has never failed. Faithfulness, in the face of prolonged isolation, is the common denominator in every one of these lives. Job refused to curse God even when his health collapsed and his friends misjudged him. David refused to lift his hand against Saul, even when he had the perfect opportunity to eliminate his threat. Joseph refused to compromise with Potiphar's wife, even though obedience cost him his freedom. These were not short inconveniences. They were extended seasons of injustice. Months turned into years. Silence stretched long enough to feel permanent. And in those stretches, no applause came, no visible reward appeared. They simply kept choosing integrity when compromise would have been easier. That is what you did. You kept showing up. You kept praying. You kept refusing to become bitter. You kept your character intact when no one would have blamed you for cutting corners. You endured without public confirmation. And that endurance was not weakness. It was spiritual muscle being built in obscurity. If you reduce the pattern to its essence, it almost reads like a spiritual equation written in invisible ink. Wilderness multiplied by faithfulness equals promotion level. The depth of isolation corresponds to the height of authority. The length of hiddenness determines the weight of influence. No one graduates to a high-level assignment after passing a low-level test. The cave prepares the king. The prison prepares the governor. The ash heap prepares the intercessor. And the wilderness you walked through was not excessive punishment. It was calibrated preparation. Every delay stretched your capacity. Every disappointment trained your emotional discipline. Every moment of invisibility forced you to anchor your identity in something deeper than applause. You thought you were simply surviving, but you were being reinforced from the inside out. Your roots were being driven deep enough to hold the kind of blessing that does not collapse under pressure. For a long time, you assumed that the entire test was about endurance. You believed that if you could just outlast the storm, if you could just remain faithful long enough, the suffering would stop, and that would be the reward. You measured success by your ability to withstand. You told yourself that the point was to prove loyalty, to demonstrate consistency, to show heaven that you would not quit. And in part, that was true. Endurance mattered. Faithfulness mattered. But what you did not realize is that faithfulness was only the visible layer of a deeper evaluation taking place beneath the surface. You thought the exam question was about obedience under pressure. In reality, obedience was only the doorway to something more profound. The revelation that begins to unfold is this: faithfulness was the cover story. It was the external behavior that everyone could observe, including you. But while you were focused on staying consistent, something else was being measured quietly. How would you respond to being overlooked? How would you handle being forgotten? Could you maintain purity when there was no recognition? Could you continue believing when results were delayed beyond what felt reasonable? Endurance was the obvious test, but invisibility was the hidden one. Job's endurance proved his loyalty, but his isolation exposed the depth of his trust. David's patience proved his discipline, but the years in caves revealed whether he could carry a crown without insecurity. Joseph's integrity proved his morality, but being forgotten in prison exposed whether he could stay aligned when help did not arrive on time. And now you begin to see your own wilderness differently. The delays were not simply obstacles to overcome. They were mirrors reflecting the true condition of your heart. When no one clapped, you kept going. When no one endorsed you, you stayed steady. When promises from others dissolved into silence, you did not allow bitterness to define you. That is why the equation matters. Wilderness multiplied by faithfulness does not merely produce promotion. It produces transformation. You are not the same person who entered the desert. Your reactions have matured. Your discernment has sharpened. Your dependence on validation has decreased. You have been stripped of superficial motivations. And while you once believed the goal was simply to survive long enough to escape, the deeper truth is that the wilderness was constructing someone capable of carrying what is next without collapsing under its weight. As the wilderness equation begins to unfold with greater clarity, you are ready to confront the layer beneath endurance, because the deeper test was never simply about obedience under pressure. It was about invisibility under silence. Obedience is visible. It can be measured. It can be applauded. People can point to your discipline, your integrity, your restraint, and say that you are faithful. But invisibility is different. Invisibility is when you do everything right and nothing moves. It is when you show up consistently and no one notices. It is when your prayers seem to echo back without response. Obedience tests your actions. Invisibility tests your identity. And this is where the weight of your season truly rested. You believed you were being examined on loyalty, yet heaven was quietly observing how you handled being overlooked. Would you still trust if no one promoted you? Would you still give your best if no one affirmed you? Would you remain aligned if recognition never arrived? That was the forgotten test. Joseph embodies this with unsettling precision. He interpreted dreams in prison with accuracy and compassion. He helped the chief cupbearer regain his position. He did not withhold excellence just because he was incarcerated. He did not say, "Why should I care when I am confined?" He continued to operate in his gift, even in confinement. And the cupbearer promised to remember him, promised to speak his name in Pharaoh's court, promised to advocate for his release. But Scripture records a single sentence that carries enormous weight. The cupbearer did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. 2 full years passed, not 2 days, not 2 weeks, 2 years of silence after a promise. 2 years of waiting for a name to be mentioned. 2 years of knowing that someone out there held the key to his breakthrough and simply did nothing. That is not a test of obedience. That is a test of invisibility. You know what it feels like to be Joseph in that moment. You did your part. You showed up. You helped. You were loyal. You invested. And when the time came for others to reciprocate, they vanished into convenience. They moved on. They forgot your contribution. You were left sitting in a metaphorical prison, not because you lacked character, but because someone else failed to act. And the real temptation in that space is not disobedience. It is bitterness. It is the subtle shift of the heart that says, "Why bother?" It is the internal narrative that whispers, "If this is how it ends, I will protect myself next time." But you did not allow your heart to calcify. You felt the sting. You processed the disappointment. Yet you refused to let neglect distort your integrity. Staying pure when ignored requires more strength than staying obedient when observed. When people are watching, discipline is easier. When no one sees, character is revealed. This is why the forgotten test cuts deeper than the faithfulness test. Faithfulness asks, "Will you obey?" Invisibility asks, "Will you still believe you are called when no one validates you?" It challenges your sense of worth. It confronts your need for confirmation. It strips away applause until all that remains is conviction. And conviction without validation is one of the hardest terrains to navigate. You learned to survive in rooms where your name was not mentioned. You learned to keep building, even when no one endorsed your efforts. You learned to trust promises from God more than promises from people. That transformation does not happen casually. It is forged through repeated moments where you could have hardened your heart, but chose softness instead. You could have withdrawn your gift, but chose to keep giving. You could have embraced cynicism, but chose faith. Passing the test of being forgotten without becoming bitter is not a small achievement. Bitterness would have been understandable. It would have been justified in human terms. Yet bitterness would have anchored you to the prison. Joseph's release did not come from resentment. It came because his heart remained clear enough to interpret again when Pharaoh called. If he had allowed 2 years of neglect to poison his spirit, he would not have been ready when opportunity knocked. And this is what heaven was measuring in you. Could you endure obscurity without poisoning your own future? Could you remain teachable while overlooked? Could you continue refining your craft, deepening your character, strengthening your faith, even when recognition was delayed? You survived without applause. You survived without constant validation. You survived without public affirmation. That means your identity is no longer anchored in noise. It is anchored in calling. There is a rare strength that develops in people who learn to operate in silence. They become less reactive, less dependent, more grounded. Applause becomes optional rather than necessary. And when recognition finally arrives, it does not intoxicate them, because they already learned to live without it. That is why the forgotten test was so crucial. If you had been promoted too early, you might have confused applause with purpose. But now you know the difference. You know that validation is temporary and calling is permanent. So when you look back at the years where it felt like you were invisible, do not label them wasted. They were refining chambers. They were identity workshops. They were silent proving grounds where your internal architecture was reinforced. You did not collapse into resentment. You did not abandon your integrity. You did not trade your future for temporary revenge. You passed the forgotten test. And because you did, the promotion that follows will not merely elevate your position. It will reveal the depth of who you have quietly become. Now that you understand the depth of the forgotten test, you are prepared to receive what Scripture calls the Shalom revelation. Because what comes after invisibility is not mere survival. It is supernatural compensation. In Joel 2:25, the promise is spoken with a tone that many have read too casually. I will restore to you the years that the locust has eaten. At first glance, it sounds like simple repayment, as if heaven is saying, you lost 5 years, so I will give you 5 years back. But the Hebrew language refuses to be that limited. The word used is shalom. And shalom does not describe basic restoration. It describes completion. It describes fullness. It describes repayment with added weight, added value, added overflow. In ancient legal terms, shalom implied paying back with interest, sometimes multiple times over, to account not only for the loss, but for the damage, the inconvenience, the distress. This is not God handing you a refund. This is God issuing an overpayment. You must let that settle in your spirit. The years you thought were wasted were not simply paused. They were invested. The tears you shed were not lost in the dark. They were recorded. The nights you lay awake questioning your sanity were not invisible. They were accounted for. Shalom means that heaven does not calculate compensation in equal measure. Heaven calculates in abundance. The enemy may have consumed time, opportunities, relationships, finances, momentum. But when God declares shalom, He is not obligated to return the exact amount stolen. He is free to multiply the outcome beyond what was originally lost. And that multiplication is not symbolic. It manifests in tangible ways. It shows up in new connections that would never have existed without your wilderness. It appears in doors that open not gradually, but suddenly. It unfolds in opportunities that carry disproportionate impact compared to the effort required. This is where divine compensation becomes accelerated blessing. Acceleration does not mean recklessness. It means compression. Imagine 20 years of growth condensed into 5. Imagine influence rising faster than logic would predict. Imagine favor appearing in rooms you were once denied access to. That is the nature of Shalom. It does not operate according to standard timelines. It collapses delay into destiny. It compresses drought into harvest. But acceleration requires capacity. That is why the wilderness had to be long enough to stretch you. If Shalom had arrived before you were refined, it would have overwhelmed you. Blessing without maturity destroys more people than adversity. So heaven waited. Heaven allowed the desert to do its work. Heaven permitted the silence to deepen your roots. And now, because you did not forfeit your character, the acceleration can land safely. You are not entering a season of simple recovery. Recovery implies returning to baseline. Recovery suggests regaining what was lost and stabilizing there. But Shalom is not baseline restoration. It is elevation beyond what existed before. Think carefully. Joseph did not leave prison and return to his father's house to resume shepherding. He left prison and stepped into governance over Egypt. David did not emerge from caves to merely reclaim his previous comfort. He emerged to sit on a throne. Job did not receive back the same number of possessions. He received double. That pattern is not poetic coincidence. It is prophetic structure. When God restores through Shalom, He restores beyond former measure. This is why what you are about to experience may feel disproportionate to your current position. You may look at your resources and think, this is too much, too fast. You may question whether you are ready. But readiness was established in obscurity. Capacity was built in silence. The compression of years into a short season does not erase the years. It honors them. Every quiet sacrifice, every unseen act of obedience, every restrained response, every moment you refused bitterness, all of it accumulated like stored potential. Shalom releases that stored potential at once. And this is where your identity must shift. You are not stepping into a mere healing season. You are stepping into a Shalom season. Healing focuses on wounds. Shalom focuses on wholeness. Healing addresses what was broken. Shalom establishes what is complete. In a healing mindset, you are cautious, tentative, protective. In a Shalom mindset, you are confident, receptive, and aligned. You are no longer asking, how do I survive? You are asking, how do I steward overflow? That question alone signals transition. Understand this clearly. Shalom does not mean the absence of responsibility. It means the presence of opportunity. It does not remove stewardship. It intensifies it. When compensation is abundant, discipline must be mature. When doors open rapidly, discernment must be sharp. But you would not be invited into this season if you lacked the internal architecture to hold it. The forgotten test ensured that applause would not intoxicate you. The wilderness ensured that pressure would not break you. And now, Shalom ensures that loss will not define you. You are not being handed crumbs. You are being entrusted with multiplication. The locust season consumed, but the harvest season overwhelms. The delay stretched, but the acceleration restores beyond imagination. So as you stand on the threshold of what feels almost too good to believe, do not reduce it to mere recovery. Lift your perspective. This is divine overpayment. This is accelerated alignment. This is the compression of struggle into significance. You are not entering restoration. You are entering shalom. As the reality of shalom begins to settle around you, something unexpected rises alongside it. And this is where we must speak honestly about the fear of receiving the blessing. Because hidden beneath your prayers for breakthrough is a quiet anxiety about what will happen if it actually arrives. You have asked for increase, but part of you trembles at the thought of holding it. You have longed for promotion, yet you secretly question whether you will sabotage it once it is placed in your hands. This fear is not loud. It does not announce itself boldly. It whispers. It says, "What if I ruin it? What if I cannot maintain it? What if success changes me or exposes me?" And because you survived so long in scarcity and uncertainty, abundance feels unfamiliar. Unfamiliar territory can feel unsafe. You know how to navigate drought. You know how to operate under pressure. But overflow introduces a different vulnerability. When you have nothing, there is nothing to lose. When you finally have something precious, the fear of losing it intensifies. This is why guilt sometimes accompanies breakthrough. You expected to feel pure excitement when doors opened. Instead, you feel cautious. You may even feel hesitant to celebrate publicly. A part of you wonders why joy does not flow effortlessly. You might judge yourself, thinking that if you truly trusted God, you would be dancing already. But this reaction is not proof of weak faith. It is evidence of prolonged strain. When someone has endured repeated disappointment, their mind learns to soften expectations as a protective strategy. Hope becomes guarded. Celebration becomes measured. It is not ingratitude, it is adaptation. And adaptation kept you functioning in the wilderness. But now that the season has shifted, that same protective mechanism can interfere with reception. To understand this clearly, you must recognize how trauma rewires the brain into what science calls beta survival mode. Beta is the frequency of alertness, problem-solving, scanning, reacting. It is necessary in crisis. It heightens awareness. It sharpens reflexes. During your wilderness, beta was your ally. It helped you detect subtle threats. It kept you vigilant when stability felt fragile. But prolonged exposure to stress can anchor the brain in this state. When the nervous system remains activated for too long, it begins to interpret neutrality as potential danger. It does not easily distinguish between threat and opportunity. Both trigger heightened alertness. This is why when blessing approaches, your body may respond with tension rather than relaxation. Your nervous system has been conditioned to equate sudden change with risk. This biological response explains why the nervous system can perceive blessings as threats. A financial breakthrough may trigger anxiety rather than peace because increase feels unpredictable. A new relationship may stir caution rather than ease because attachment once preceded loss. A promotion may create pressure rather than pride because visibility once invited attack. The body remembers. It remembers instability. It remembers disappointment. It remembers how quickly hope can collapse. So when something good begins to form, your system braces instead of receiving. It is not rejecting the blessing consciously. It is attempting to protect you subconsciously. But protection rooted in past seasons cannot govern future ones. The wilderness expired spiritually, but your biology has not yet updated. Think of a soldier returning home who still flinches at sudden noises. The war ended, but the reflex remains. In the same way, your environment may now be shifting toward abundance, yet your internal wiring still anticipates scarcity. This mismatch creates tension. Heaven declares, "You are promoted," but your nervous system whispers, "Stay alert." God announces, "Shalom," but your body says, "Do not relax." And if this gap is not addressed, it can lead to subtle self-sabotage. You might delay decisions unnecessarily. You might overanalyze opportunities until they pass. You might push away healthy connections because they feel too calm. Not because you want to fail, but because calm feels unfamiliar. The key insight here is that fear of receiving is not a spiritual flaw. It is a neurological echo. It is the residue of endurance. And echoes fade when they are acknowledged rather than shamed. Instead of condemning yourself for hesitating, observe the hesitation with compassion. Instead of forcing excitement artificially, allow your body to recalibrate gradually. Blessing requires a different internal frequency than survival. It requires openness rather than hypervigilance. It requires trust rather than constant scanning. And trust is not merely theological. It is physiological. Your breathing slows. Your shoulders soften. Your mind stops rehearsing worst-case scenarios. This transition from survival to reception is delicate but necessary. You cannot carry shalom while clinging to scarcity reflexes. You cannot steward overflow while bracing for collapse. The blessing is not fragile. Your nervous system simply needs time to learn that safety is no longer temporary. And as that recalibration unfolds, you will notice subtle shifts. Joy will come in waves rather than explosions. Confidence will grow quietly rather than dramatically. Peace will settle in moments that once triggered anxiety. You are not broken because you feel cautious. You are healing. You are updating. The wilderness trained your vigilance, but shalom will train your stability. The fight-or-flight frequency served its purpose, but it is not your permanent residence. You are learning how to exist without constant defense. You are learning how to receive without suspicion. And that learning is part of the blessing itself. Now that you recognize how survival mode has lingered in your system, you are ready to understand the deeper mechanics behind what must shift. Because the transition from beta to theta is not mystical language alone. It is both spiritual and neurological reality working together. Beta is the state your mind defaults to when it senses threat. It is the frequency of analysis, urgency, scanning, reacting. In moderation, beta is useful. It helps you solve problems, navigate deadlines, and respond to immediate demands. But in prolonged wilderness seasons, beta becomes dominant. It turns into fight or flight. Your breathing becomes shallow without you noticing. Your thoughts move rapidly from one contingency plan to another. Your body holds tension, even when sitting still. You anticipate disruption before it happens. Beta was necessary when you were dodging arrows, when relationships felt unstable, when finances fluctuated, when doors slammed shut without warning. But a frequency designed for battle cannot sustain inheritance. When beta becomes chronic, it restricts your capacity to receive. It prioritizes control over surrender. It privileges vigilance over trust. And while vigilance protected you before, it now quietly interferes with rest. This is where theta must be introduced, not as an abstract spiritual concept, but as a tangible reception frequency. Theta is the brainwave state associated with deep relaxation, intuitive clarity, creative flow, and subconscious integration. It is the state your mind enters just before sleep, when defenses soften and insight becomes accessible. Spiritually, theta mirrors what Scripture describes as abiding, resting, dwelling. It is the posture of trust. In theta, your nervous system signals safety. Your heart rate slows. Your muscles release tension. Your mind stops rehearsing danger. And it is in this relaxed but aware state that deeper alignment occurs. Divine communication becomes clearer, not because God suddenly speaks louder, but because your internal noise quiets enough to hear. When you were in beta survival mode, even good news felt threatening because your system interpreted all change as risk. But in theta, change can be processed as opportunity. Blessing can be recognized as provision rather than pressure. Trauma disrupts this natural movement between states. When stress becomes prolonged, the brain adapts by reinforcing neural pathways that prioritize vigilance. It strengthens the circuits associated with threat detection and weakens those associated with rest and openness. Over time, the brain learns to remain on guard even in neutral environments. This is why trauma can block blessing reception without you consciously choosing to resist it. Your spirit may be ready for shalom, but your nervous system remains suspicious. You might pray for expansion, yet tense up when it begins. You might long for connection, yet withdraw when someone trustworthy appears. The blockage is not rebellion. It is conditioning. And conditioning can be recalibrated. This recalibration does not require extreme effort or force. In fact, forcing yourself into calm often reinforces tension. Instead, the brain responds to rhythm and repetition. This is where audio entrainment enters the conversation. Entrainment refers to the brain's natural ability to synchronize with external stimuli. When exposed to specific sound frequencies, the brain gradually aligns its own electrical patterns to match. It is similar to how your breathing unconsciously synchronizes with slow music, or how your mood shifts with certain melodies. Scientists have studied how binaural beats and rhythmic audio can guide the brain from beta into theta by gently encouraging slower wave patterns. This is not manipulation. It is cooperation with how the nervous system already functions. The tool referred to as the genius wave operates within this framework. It is not positioned as magic or instant enlightenment. It is structured as a consistent auditory stimulus designed to nudge the brain toward theta frequency. By listening for a brief, intentional period each day, the neural pathways associated with relaxation and intuitive clarity are strengthened. Over time, this repetition helps counterbalance the dominance of beta survival wiring. Think of it as reminding your brain of a setting it once knew but temporarily forgot. When trauma anchored you in vigilance, your system adapted for protection. Now, the adaptation must evolve. The genius wave serves as a tuning fork, gently realigning your internal frequency with the state most conducive to reception. As theta becomes more accessible, subtle changes unfold. You may notice that decisions feel less frantic, opportunities feel less overwhelming. Conversations carry less underlying tension. Instead of reacting immediately, you respond thoughtfully. Your body no longer braces at every notification or unexpected call. You become less driven by urgency and more guided by discernment. This is not passivity. It is regulated strength. In regulated strength, you do not need to prove readiness. You embody it. The shift from beta to theta is not about abandoning responsibility. It is about restoring balance. Beta remains available when necessary, but it no longer governs your baseline. Theta becomes your home frequency. And from that home frequency, shalom flows more naturally. You stop gripping blessing as if it might vanish, You hold it steadily because your nervous system is no longer shouting alarm. The wilderness trained you to fight. The frequency shift trains you to receive. And reception is not weakness. It is the final phase of preparation, where what was promised can finally land without being pushed away by an outdated survival reflex. As your internal frequency begins to stabilize, and you sense that shalom is no longer a distant promise, but an approaching reality, you must understand that blessing is not sustained by excitement alone. It is sustained by maturity. And this is where the stewardship decision tree becomes essential. Overflow without structure can dissolve as quickly as scarcity once did. Many people pray for increase, but are never taught how to hold it. They celebrate the arrival, but mishandle the assignment. And because your season is not about temporary relief, but lasting elevation, you must approach breakthrough with intentional discipline. Blessings require maturity to sustain, because increase magnifies whatever already exists within you. If fear governs you, increase amplifies fear. If insecurity lingers, visibility intensifies insecurity. But if stability and discernment have been built in obscurity, increase becomes multiplication rather than pressure. The first movement in this decision tree is deceptively simple, yet profoundly powerful. Pause for 3 days. When unexpected opportunity or sudden financial increase arrives, your nervous system may surge with adrenaline. You may feel an urge to act immediately, to fix everything at once, to reward yourself for surviving the wilderness. But immediate reaction often comes from old wiring rather than renewed frequency. The pause interrupts impulse. It signals to your body that urgency is no longer your master. 3 days of stillness allows emotional spikes to settle. It allows you to observe rather than react. During that pause, you breathe, you reflect. You resist the temptation to announce prematurely. Silence in this stage is not secrecy. It is protection. When Joseph interpreted Pharaoh's dream, he did not rush into Egypt's streets celebrating. He listened, assessed, and prepared a strategy. In the same way, your pause honors the magnitude of what has arrived. It communicates that you are no longer governed by desperation. From that place of calm observation, you move into the second layer, categorizing test versus gift. Not every increase is pure overflow. Sometimes, provision arrives exactly at the level of your immediate need. That type of increase tests discipline. If money comes that precisely covers a debt or crisis, the question is not how you can expand it, but whether you will apply it responsibly. Tests of discipline often masquerade as relief. But if the amount or opportunity exceeds what you currently require, that overflow signals gift. Gifts expand capacity rather than merely patch holes. They invite vision rather than survival. Discernment is required to distinguish between the two, because mislabeling a test as a gift leads to indulgence, and mislabeling a gift as a test leads to fear-based hoarding. The decision tree trains you to observe without assumption. It slows the narrative long enough for clarity to emerge. Once clarity is gained, you enter the third and most transformative step, deciding from your future self rather than your wounded self. The wounded self remembers scarcity. It remembers rejection. It remembers humiliation. Decisions made from that identity often seek emotional compensation. The wounded self might want to spend quickly to soothe past deprivation, or say yes to every opportunity to prove worth. But the future self operates differently. The future self is healed, established, secure. It does not need validation from purchases or applause from rapid expansion. It evaluates through long-term alignment. When faced with a new partnership, the future self asks whether this aligns with vision rather than whether it fills loneliness. When handling new finances, the future self asks what builds sustainability rather than what quiets anxiety. This shift in decision-making is the true evidence of promotion. You are no longer reacting from what hurt you. You are acting from who you are becoming. Managing overflow without emotional spending becomes the practical outworking of this maturity. Emotional spending is not limited to money. It includes emotional commitments, rushed agreements, impulsive announcements, and premature exposure. After prolonged wilderness, the temptation is to indulge relief. But relief is temporary. Alignment is lasting. The discipline to hold overflow calmly demonstrates that you trust the source of blessing more than the blessing itself. When you can sit with increase without immediately dispersing it, you show that desperation no longer drives you. This is how shalom remains stable. Remember that stewardship is not restriction. It is preservation of momentum. It ensures that what arrives does not evaporate through excitement. The wilderness trained you to endure without abundance. The decision tree trains you to manage abundance without fear. Each step reinforces your shift from survival to authority. The pause cultivates calm. Categorization cultivates discernment. Deciding from the future self cultivates identity alignment. Together, they form a structure strong enough to hold accelerated blessing. As you practice this protocol, you will notice something subtle yet powerful. Your confidence will deepen not because of what you receive, but because of how you handle it. You will sense that you are no longer scrambling. You are stewarding. You are not grasping. You are governing. And governance is the mark of someone who has truly transitioned out of the wilderness and into a season where overflow does not overwhelm, but elevates. As you begin to stabilize your frequency and steward what is arriving with maturity, you must also understand that opposition does not disappear simply because promotion has been approved. It merely changes strategy. And this is where the 3 final attacks reveal themselves with subtle precision. When the enemy realizes he can no longer block the blessing from reaching you, he shifts from obstruction to manipulation. He stops trying to close doors and starts trying to influence your response to the doors that open. The battlefield no longer centers on preventing shalom, but on provoking self-sabotage. This is why discernment in this phase becomes sharper than ever. The attacks are no longer loud storms. They are subtle invitations. The first of these is the premature celebration trap. It often arrives disguised as a small but visible win. A partial breakthrough surfaces. A modest financial increase appears. A conversation opens that feels promising. And, immediately, adrenaline whispers that this is the full manifestation. The temptation is to declare completion too soon, to broadcast victory, to emotionally relax as if the entire process has concluded. But premature celebration drains focus. It lowers vigilance before the final layer lands. Think of David after his anointing. He was declared king long before he wore the crown. If he had celebrated publicly as if Saul no longer existed, he would have exposed himself to unnecessary danger. In the same way, small wins are confirmations, not completions. They are appetizers, not feasts. Gratitude is appropriate. Public display may not be. Premature celebration creates exposure before stabilization, and exposure without foundation invites vulnerability. As you resist the urge to overreact to early signals, The second confrontation often surfaces in the form of the familiar echo from past relationships. Just as your frequency begins to elevate, someone from your wilderness season may reappear. An ex-partner sends a message. A former friend checks in. An old collaborator proposes reconnection. The timing feels uncanny, almost fated. But discernment reveals that elevation triggers visibility, and visibility attracts observation. Not every return is malicious, but many are misaligned. Familiarity can tether you back to the emotional patterns you have just healed. Conversations that once triggered insecurity may attempt to reopen old narratives. The danger here is not obvious conflict. It is emotional regression. If you re-enter dynamics that belong to a lower frequency, you risk diluting the stability you fought to build. Silence in this stage becomes a shield. You do not owe access to everyone who once knew you. Promotion sometimes requires distance from those who only recognize your previous version. Then, just when momentum feels steady and alignment seems clear, the third and most deceptive attack can arrive. Phantom fatigue before breakthrough. This fatigue feels disproportionate to your activity level. It is not ordinary tiredness from exertion. It is a heavy wave that suggests giving up at the threshold. Right before the contract finalizes, you feel overwhelmed. Right before the opportunity crystallizes, you feel tempted to withdraw. The mind suggests that maintaining this new level is too demanding. The body whispers that retreat would be easier. This fatigue is not always physical. It is psychological resistance to expansion. Growth requires energy. Expansion stretches capacity. And just before breakthrough solidifies, there is often a final push that tests endurance one more time. If you misinterpret this fatigue as confirmation that you are unready, you may step back inches from the finish line. Recognizing it as resistance rather than incapacity allows you to push through with clarity rather than panic. Understanding these three patterns reveals how the enemy's strategy evolves. When blocking fails, he attempts to provoke you into discarding what he cannot steal. He tempts you to celebrate prematurely so you relax too early. He invites familiar voices back in so old wounds resurface. He amplifies exhaustion so you voluntarily withdraw. None of these strategies require direct confrontation. They rely on your reaction. That is why self-governance becomes the final battleground. You are no longer fighting external opposition. You are guarding internal stability. Strategic silence becomes one of your strongest forms of protection during this stage. Silence does not mean isolation. It means measured disclosure. It means allowing what is forming to root deeply before exposing it to external opinion. When seeds are planted, they grow underground before they break surface. If uprooted too early, growth is compromised. In the same way, your breakthroughs require incubation. Silence protects incubation. It shields developing momentum from unnecessary commentary. It prevents premature validation from becoming your fuel. As you walk through this final stretch, remember that heightened resistance often signals proximity to manifestation. The closer you move to tangible fulfillment, the more subtle the distractions become. But you are not unaware. You recognize the patterns now. You receive small wins with gratitude, but without overexposure. You evaluate returning voices with discernment rather than nostalgia. You confront fatigue with understanding rather than surrender. In doing so, you neutralize strategies designed to cause self-sabotage. You have survived overt warfare. You can certainly navigate subtle interference. The wilderness taught you vigilance. The forgotten test taught you identity stability. The stewardship phase taught you discipline. Now all of those lessons converge. You are no longer reacting from fear. You are responding from awareness. And awareness dismantles manipulation before it gains traction. The final attacks lose power when they are recognized. And as you maintain your frequency, protect your silence, and refuse premature reactions, you move steadily toward the full weight of Shalom, without dropping it inches from arrival. As you move through the final stretch of this transition, something remarkable begins to surface within you. And this is where the revelation of Huper Echo emerges. Because the ultimate confirmation of your shift is not external applause, but an internal peace that defies explanation. In Philippians 4:7, Paul writes about the peace of God that surpasses all understanding. But the English phrase softens what the original Greek intensifies. The word translated as surpasses comes from Huper Echo. Huper means over, above, beyond measure. Echo implies possession or holding authority over. This is not gentle tranquility slipping quietly into your thoughts. This is a dominant, towering peace that stands above your logic, above your fear, above your past conditioning. It does not politely coexist with anxiety. It overrides it. It occupies the highest seat in your inner world. When Huper Echo settles within you, your mind may attempt to rehearse worst-case scenarios, but peace refuses to bow. This kind of peace does not depend on circumstances aligning perfectly. It is not the result of every problem disappearing. It emerges even while contracts are pending, conversations are unresolved, and outcomes are still forming. That is why it confuses the logical brain. Logic says you should wait until everything is secured before relaxing. Trauma says, stay alert until all threats are neutralized. But Huper Echo interrupts both narratives. It establishes calm before evidence. It stabilizes you before manifestation becomes visible. And this is how you know your frequency has truly shifted. When peace arrives prior to proof, you are no longer operating in survival mode. You are aligned with trust. To grasp this fully, imagine standing in the center of a hurricane. Winds roar with violent intensity. Debris spins chaotically. Structures tremble. Anyone observing from outside would expect panic. Yet in the eye of the storm, there is stillness. The air is calm. The ground feels steady. Noise surrounds but does not penetrate. That is Huper Echo. Chaos may continue at the edges of your life. Emails may still require responses. Finances may still be processing. Relationships may still be recalibrating. But at your core, there is stability. Your heart rate remains steady. Your breathing remains slow. You are not denying the storm. You are simply positioned in the eye rather than the outer wall. And positioning is everything. This peace is not passive. It is aggressive in its authority. It stands guard over your thoughts. It prevents fear from escalating into panic. It blocks the narrative that says you are unprepared. It overrides the impulse to sabotage. When Huper Echo governs, you do not react impulsively to small disruptions. You observe. You assess. You respond with clarity. That clarity becomes your evidence that recalibration has occurred. There was once a chosen one who reached this exact threshold. After years of obscurity, they experienced a sudden opening that multiplied their income and influence. At first, they felt the familiar surge of adrenaline. Old beta reflexes stirred. But instead of reacting, they paused. They applied stewardship. They guarded their silence. As the opportunity expanded, opposition surfaced in subtle forms. Familiar voices reached out. Minor setbacks appeared. Yet internally, something had changed. Instead of spiraling, they felt calm. Not naive optimism, but grounded assurance. Contracts were still being finalized, but anxiety did not dominate. Conversations carried weight, yet they slept peacefully. When the breakthrough fully materialized, they realized the true miracle was not the increase itself. It was the peace that preceded it. That peace became their confirmation that the shift was authentic. Peace becomes the confirmation of frequency alignment because it signals that your nervous system and your spirit are no longer at war. When you were in beta survival mode, your body contradicted your prayers. You asked for blessing, but felt threatened by its arrival. Now, your internal state agrees with your external reality. Your biology no longer resists what heaven releases. You can hold expansion without bracing. You can receive increase without flinching. That harmony between spirit and nervous system is the true evidence of maturity. And notice something profound. Hooper Echo does not eliminate responsibility. It empowers it. When you are calm, you make better decisions. When you are stable, you steward wisely. When you are not governed by urgency, you discern clearly. Peace sharpens judgment rather than dulling it. It creates space for insight. It allows you to hear guidance without distortion. This is the final sign that you have crossed over. Not the applause, not the visible reward, but the towering peace that stands above your logic and refuses to be shaken. The hurricane may still spin at the edges, but you remain centered. And from that center, you step fully into shalom. Not as someone scrambling to survive it, but as someone anchored deeply enough to sustain it. Now, as everything converges, this is not merely a conclusion, but an activation and a crossing over. Because information without embodiment changes nothing. And you are not here to be informed. You are here to transition. You have traced the pattern, from wilderness to invisibility, from beta survival to theta reception, from forgotten years to shalom overpayment. And now the shift must be sealed. This is the moment where understanding becomes agreement. This is the threshold where insight becomes alignment. So steady your breathing. Let your shoulders drop. Bring your awareness inward. You are not rushing into the next season. You are stepping into it with intention. And intention is what separates reaction from authority. Father God, in the name above every name, we acknowledge that this crossing is not symbolic, but spiritual and biological. You saw the silent endurance. You saw the nights of questioning, the isolation, the restraint when retaliation would have been easier. You saw the integrity maintained in obscurity. You saw the heart that did not curse you in the dark. And because you are not unjust, we declare that the season of wilderness has concluded. We bind the residue of trauma that lingered beyond its assignment. We bind the reflex that equated blessing with danger. We bind the hypervigilance that once served protection, but now obstructs reception. And we activate a new frequency within mind and body. We activate stability. We activate clarity. We activate Hooper Echo peace that towers above logic and silences old narratives. Let every neural pathway anchored in scarcity begin to soften. Let every survival reflex recalibrate to safety. Let the nervous system update to the reality that the war season has ended. This is not denial of past pain. It is reclassification. Pain was preparation, not prophecy. Delay was training, not destiny. We declare that Shalom is not approaching timidly, but landing fully. What was consumed will not merely be restored, it will be multiplied. What was delayed will not trickle in gradually. It will accelerate in divine compression. 20 years of pressure will collapse into 5 years of unprecedented alignment. Opportunities once blocked will open without strain. Connections once withheld will appear without manipulation. And overpayment will replace loss. You are no longer standing in the waiting room of your calling. The waiting room taught patience, but it was never your permanent address. The wilderness refined endurance, but it was never your inheritance. Today marks release. Release from overanalyzing. Release from bracing for disappointment. Release from rehearsing worst-case outcomes. You are officially dismissed from survival mode. But dismissal does not mean irresponsibility. It means reassignment. You are being reassigned from fighter to steward, from defender to governor, from survivor to carrier of overflow. And now comes the question that heaven does not force but invites. Will you steward the shalom? Will you pause before reacting? Will you categorize wisely rather than emotionally? Will you decide from the healed future self instead of the wounded past self? Will you guard your silence when necessary and refuse premature celebration? Will you hold peace even when logic attempts to argue? This is not a test of worthiness. That test has already been passed. This is a commitment to maturity. Blessing without stewardship dissolves. Blessing with stewardship multiplies. Take a moment and answer internally, not with volume, but with clarity. I am ready. Let that agreement form not as hype, but as settled conviction. Readiness does not mean you feel fearless. It means you are aligned. It means your spirit and nervous system are no longer in conflict. It means you trust the source more than you fear the outcome. Now enter silence deliberately. Silence is not emptiness. It is sealing. In ancient ceremonies, covenants were often confirmed not by noise, but by stillness. Stillness marks completion. So allow 10 quiet seconds in your mind. No rehearsing, no planning, no anticipating. Just presence. Let the frequency settle. Let peace anchor deeper. Let the declaration imprint on your biology. This is the moment where transition stabilizes. And as silence concludes, recognize what has happened. You have crossed over internally before anything external shifts. That internal crossing is what sustains the external change. The door may open tomorrow or in 40 days, but you are no longer waiting anxiously at its frame. You are positioned. You are grounded. You are aligned. You are officially dismissed into your new season. Walk without apology. Steward without fear. Receive without flinching. Maintain your peace as proof of alignment. The wilderness has expired. The shalom is active. And you are not merely entering blessing, you are entering governance over it.